The second tool that a country who is trying to protect its own businesses is likely to use is a subsidy. Definition is here. Basically, it's when the government is trying to reduce costs for a particular industry, make them able to make more of a profit, and the effect economically is always going to be that it shifts the supply curve down. Typically, these are awarded on a per unit basis. So we're going to use the example of milk. Instead of just saying, here's $1 million, instead they say, for every gallon of milk or whatever you produce, we're going to give you X amount of money. So the incentive is to produce more and more and more, and obviously the subsidy keeps going as long as you do. It's a bit scary for the government, we'll see this in a second, because they have essentially written a blank check. If the milk industry produces, infinite amounts of milk, it's going to cost the government a lot of money. So that can be a real drawback of doing this. Some other things to think about. It is a bit of hidden protectionism. I said yesterday that a country doesn't want to be seen as protectionist. So, for example, the EU and the USA, they use a lot of these on agriculture, and a lot of countries have a real problem with it. In fact, it's in both cases, it's pretty ridiculous the amount of subsidizing that goes on in agriculture. It is protectionism because it is giving their own domestic businesses an advantage, but because you're not doing it to another country, you can sort of dance around whether it's protectionism or not. You can say, oh, I'm not hurting you, I'm just helping my farmers. Well, it is protectionism, and it's kind of a pretty poor attempt to veil it. And that's essentially what you're going to see. Okay, so let's look at it on the diagram. First off, let's remember that whenever you subsidize, it's going to shift the supply curve down directly by the amount of the subsidy. So if we're talking gallons of milk here, this amount that it shifted down, maybe this is going to be 50 cents or something like that, a quarter, or 50 rand or whatever it might be. 5 rand, not 50. Anyhow, that amount that it shifts down isn't really important yet. It'll be important in a second. Let's look at our world supply curve. So our world supply curve was here at PW, and before the subsidies, so just looking at the first supply curve, domestic producers would have produced only Q1. Demand wouldn't have been satisfied until Q2, so foreign producers would have produced the rest of that supply curve. Remember, when we look at the free trade diagram, it's really important we visualize where the supply curve is. So before the subsidy, the supply curve was here. After the subsidy, we see this gets pushed down, and now the domestic suppliers of milk, the domestic cows, I suppose, they are more efficient up until Q3. So what that means is essentially Q1 to Q3, that amount used to be produced by foreign suppliers of milk, but now it's going to be produced by domestic suppliers of milk. So the effect on the foreign suppliers is they're going to lose Q1 to Q3, and then after Q3, they're still going to produce until demand is satisfied. Notice here that price isn't going to change. Because we're only giving this advantage to the domestic suppliers, it's not going to have an effect on demand inside of the country. And that can be another strong reason for using this. If it is something like milk, where people are going to be really irritated if the price comes up, remember in a tariff it caused the price to come up. Well, we always have to have in our minds that people who are making these decisions, most of them get their jobs by keeping people happy. It goes back to that first rule of economics and the first rule of politics on my door. So we have to see that's another incentive to the people who are setting this, is that price isn't going to change. Okay. In fact, if we assume that the imported milk is of a higher quality perhaps and has a higher price, we would see the price maybe drop a little bit for the domestic milk. This is kind of talking in general or average terms. Okay. So there's going to be no change to price, but again, notice, there is going to be a huge cost of the subsidy to the government. The only new milk they got for their domestic producers is Q1 to Q3, but they have to pay a subsidy on all of the milk. that the domestic producers produce, 0 to Q3. So what's gonna happen is from Q3, we have to come up to the old supply curve and then across. Because remember, distance A is the value of the subsidy, what the government has to pay. So this whole region here, from PW up to P1 and over to Q3, this whole region is going to be what the government has to pay just to get Q1 to Q3 to be produced by domestic suppliers. So again, the big question on this is it worth it? Does it cost too much?